What we're trying to do here in the month of November is to lift our eyes up from the list of things that we're thankful for. And it is so very appropriate that we list the many things that God has blessed us with, list the many things that we're thankful for. I'm trying to lift our eyes up from that list to the God who has given us these things. And I've talked to you about the fact that the God that we worship, the God that we believe in, that He is a powerful God, that His power is so great that His voice shakes the wilderness. His presence is so mighty that He spans the ocean, but His desire is to bring us peace. Last week we talked about the fact that He is a wise God, and He is wise because He is His own source, and He is the owner and the originator of all wisdom, and He's not just a knower of things and a knower of facts, but He always knows what to do. And we can come to Him and have trust in His wisdom. And today I want to talk to you about the fact that our God is a just God. And when you see that, you might think just God, that He's just God or simply God or merely God. That's not what I mean. I mean that He is a God of justice. He is a God who is fair and equitable. He is a God who is righteous. And I think in all of us there is a desire, there's a thirst for justice. Imagine something with me. Imagine that tomorrow, as you're on your way home from work or from the store, picking up all of those things you'll need for the Thanksgiving feast this week, that there's a car behind you and he is being very impatient. He is right on your bumper. He's tailgating you. And even though you're going a little bit over the speed limit, you're not going fast enough for this guy. So he is just tailgating. He's swerving over like he wants to pass you as soon as there's an opportunity. Because he is making you feel a little unsafe, you speed up to give a little distance between you and him. And now you're going a little bit faster than you typically drive, but this guy still isn't happy with how fast you're driving. So he's still tailgating you. He's swerving like he's trying to pass. You recognize there's not going to be a place for him to pass safely anytime soon, so you pull off into the shoulder so that he can get on past you. He flies past you, disappears around the bend. You shake your head and pull back onto the road, headed home. And when you round that bend that he has already flown past, you see that there was a highway patrolman just around that bend, and he has that guy pulled over. And when you pass that guy who was making you feel unsafe and was being so incredibly impatient, what will you feel when you drive past him? I guarantee you that I would feel quite a bit of satisfaction when I drove past him. I would say, you're getting what you deserve. Never has a speeding ticket been given to a more worthy person than you. Now, of course, this would only happen if you pulled over and let him by instead of doing what we do most of the time. We purposely slow down, right? Because we're going to exact our own justice. You see, in each of us, there is a desire for justice. We want people who offend to have to pay. We want there to be justice. We want things to be equitable. We want the bad guy to get his due. We want the good guy to win. Even when we're children, we want things to be fair. Even as kids, we can sniff out favoritism. We will cry out if things are unfair, and our parents will often just reply, life isn't fair. But even from the time that we're kids until the day that we die, we have a desire for justice. We want things to be right. And we serve a God who is righteous, and a God who is desirous that things be justified, that they be made right. And throughout Scripture, there are passages that talk about our God being a God of justice. And we're going to look at one of those this morning in Isaiah 42. Let's read the first 4 verses. God speaking through Isaiah says, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed he shall not break, and the smoking flax he shall not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fail, nor be discouraged, till he have set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law." These 4 verses are powerful verses about our God of justice and the things that he has done and the servant that he sent to bring about justice on the earth. This past Tuesday, as Chris and I drove back from preaching at the jail, he told me about a horrible story that took place not too far from here. About 150 miles from here, you may have seen this story in the news. A 7-year-old girl was taken from a football game. And within 1 hour of her being recognized as missing, she was found. She had been murdered. She had been taken, violated, killed, and thrown in a creek. And when Chris told me about this horrible story, my immediate reaction was, I hope they catch the guy, and I hope they give them the electric chair. I hope they punish him. I read just yesterday that an arrest has been made in the murder of this little girl. And the person that is suspected to have taken her, violated, and killed her was a man who went to high school with her father and was attending the same football game because his daughter was a cheerleader. There are some absolutely horrible things committed by absolutely awful people in our world. We do not have to look long, we do not have to look far to read about, to hear about something horrible that is taking place in our world. Whether it's acts of a predator here locally or the acts of a terrorist on foreign soil, we are constantly being exposed to evil in our world. And there is something within us that cries out, there must be punishment for these heinous acts. We must hold the people responsible, accountable for their actions. I'm thankful that today we believe in a God who is a just God, who is a God of not only grace but judgment. We believe in a God who tells us that every act of terrorism, every act of barbarity, every act of debauchery, and every act of violence will be accounted for. That there is nothing that will slip under the radar of God's judgment and His wrath. That every action will be held accountable for. Scripture tells us that everyone will face a judgment day. And even for those people who they commit a crime and they get away with it, they will face judgment one day. Everyone. No one will get away with what they have done. Everyone will answer to God. But thankfully, what Isaiah tells us here in 42 is not that God is just waiting until the end of all things to bring about justice, but He has already started to bring about justice. He says in verse 1, I send my servant who will bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. Now this servant is the Messiah. It is Jesus Christ. He is the promised one who will come and begin the work of putting all things right, making everything right, making every mountain low and every valley high. He will even all things. And Isaiah tells us 3 important truths about this justice that the servant of God, the Messiah, is bringing. First of all, he tells us he's bringing divine justice. Verse 1, he says, my servant, my chosen one, the one in whom my soul delighteth. This is not just another prophet. It's not just another man of God. This is God Himself. This is God's Son, the Messiah. He will not just be one who proclaims a message of reform and proclaims a message of things being made right. He will make things right. He won't just talk about reformation, He will bring reformation. He won't just talk about restoration, He will bring restoration. In all of my efforts and all of my passions, I can merely talk of and speak of reformation and restoration. But this one, that Jesus is coming, He will bring reformation and restoration. He will bring justice. In verse 5 and on that we read earlier, Isaiah relays the message from God that the same God who created the world, the same God who put the stars into the skies, that this same God will take a personal interest in the justice of all things being made right. And this is the God that we should praise because He will do this thing. Isaiah tells us that the Messiah that comes from the Lord, that He will uphold and bring justice. You see, this is divine justice because He's bringing it with Him. Jesus did not come to enact the justice that we feel is right. He has come to bring justice from above. He did not come as an officer of our law and our courts. He did not come to work as the bailiff in our corrupt courts and our fallible human courts. No, He came to enact the justice from God's court. Now, here in our American legal system, you can appeal your case on a regular basis. You can appeal your trial. You can take it further and further up the line until you get to the ultimate court in our legal system, the Supreme Court. You can't appeal it any further than that court. And when that court makes a decision, that is the final decision. They have the final authority. And that might be true in our American legal system, but that is not true in God's kingdom. There is a court that is higher than that one. It is the final authority. And by the way, because we believe that His courtroom is the actual Supreme Court, we will always side with that court over our local courts, and yes, even our national Supreme Court. That is the highest authority. So Jesus comes bringing judgment, bringing divine judgment. He does not act out the judgment of what we think is right. He acts out the judgment that He knows is right. This is justice coming from above. This means despite what you and I think, and what our politicians scheme, and what our elected officers and appointed officers feel is right, despite what they think is right, God knows what is right. And if you have had any dealing with our American legal system, you have known that even for its strengths in comparison to all of the court systems in the world, it still has its fallibilities, it still makes errors, it's still broken. But the court system that comes from above, this is a divine one. Because this justice is divine, it can be total and complete. You see, Isaiah tells us that the Messiah brings not just divine justice, but absolute justice. Verse 1 says He will bring judgment to the Gentiles. The word he uses here means nations. And because the Old Testament writers would often refer to Israel as their nation and all other nations as Gentiles, they often use these interchangeably. This verse literally means that He will bring justice to the nations. He will bring justice to all people. And His meaning is very clear in verse 4 where He says, He shall not fail nor be discouraged till He has set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for His law. The phrase, set judgment in the earth, means until He has established His justice. Until He has set His justice in all of the earth. Now I want you to think about when God decides to establish something, He does it wholeheartedly and fully. And when He has established His justice in the earth, it means that His justice has reigned supreme. What God has relayed to us through Isaiah in verse 4, look at verse 4 with me. What He has relayed to us through Isaiah is God will not quit. He will not even be discouraged until He has set His judgment in all of the earth. Man, I tell you that if I were a judge, I would get discouraged on a regular basis at people who have broken the law and would try to hold them accountable, and they find their way out and the brokenness of the system. But God says, I will not even be discouraged until I have established my justice and my law throughout all of the earth. God's not going to quit until the job is done. God's not going to quit until His justice reigns supreme in all of the earth. He's not going to stop until He is completely done. Then it goes on to say in verse 4 that until the isles wait on His judgment. You know what He's saying? He's saying even the islands, even those islands out there that you don't even know about Israel, those islands of the Gentiles that you've heard of but you've never been to, those islands of the nations that you're not even familiar with, you haven't even discovered them yet, I will not stop until even those islands know my law and know my truth. Every corner of this globe will be covered with my justice, the Lord says. There is no place where crime will be able to hide. There is no hidden corner of the world where sin will go unchecked. I will bring my justice to all places, even the islands in the midst of the sea. Because of the plethora of islands in the Pacific Ocean, when World War II came to an end and Japan surrendered to the United States, there were many of the islands of the Pacific Ocean that kept on fighting. See, in Japanese culture, it was a dishonor to surrender. And so these Japanese soldiers just knew that their emperor would fight until the death. Until the very last Japanese man died, they would continue fighting. Before the end of the war, they were training children to fight with bamboo sticks because they were preparing for the Americans to invade. They were going to fight to the very last man. So when people told them that Japan had surrendered, they said it's a trick. It's not real. And 30 years after World War II ended, there were men in these islands still in the fight, still not giving up. It wasn't until the 70s that 2 final Japanese soldiers finally surrendered and gave up the fight. What God has said here is, even in those far-flung places where the news of a worldwide war ending doesn't get to, I will not quit until my justice is established even in those places. There is no beach where my justice will not land and reign supreme. The Lord will not quit until His justice is brought into all places. You know, here in our country, as much as we desire for there to be justice, and as much as we desire for things to be equal, we struggle to bring justice to all places. We struggle to bring justice to all of humanity. Some of you may have seen in the news the story of the pastor's wife in Indianapolis who was shot and killed in her home. She was 3 months pregnant. They are searching for her killer and searching for clues. Reading an update on that story this week, I read half of the homicides in Indianapolis from 2015 have no leads. They are unsolved. Perhaps you're familiar with the statistic that if homicide detectives do not get a solid lead within the first 48 hours of the crime, that the chances of them solving that crime diminish drastically. We are unable to bring justice within our own zip codes. But God says, when I come, I will bring justice to every square inch of this earth. My justice will be absolute and total. Now, if you know Christ, you can rest confident in this fact. Because this means that God is going to handle it. This means that God is going to make sure that every crime, that every heinous act will be answered for. Even those acts against you. Even those times that you have been slighted, that you have been wronged, God is going to take care of it. This is the reason that God says, vengeance is mine. I've got it, He says. I can handle it. You don't need to carry this torch. You don't need to try to bring vengeance, or you don't need to make things right. I'm going to make things right. You can let go of it. If you don't know Christ, the application is that there is no place that you can hide from your sin. There is no place that you can escape and not face the punishment that comes for the sins that you have committed. Those things that I don't know about, and your family doesn't know about, and no one knows about, God knows about them. And there will be no place to hide because He will bring total and absolute justice upon the earth. So maybe you're saying, Pastor Daniel, that sounds great. I know a lot of people that God needs to judge. And they're not on a far-off island somewhere. They're going to be with me this Thursday at Thanksgiving dinner, so He can start right there. Pastor Daniel, I know a lot of people that will be at work on Monday that God needs to judge. I'm ready whenever He's ready. What's taken Him so long? Isaiah tells us that this justice will be complete, but he also tells us that this justice will be faithful. And not just faithful to God's character that He desires righteousness, but also faithful to His character and that He is gracious. Let's look at verses 2 and 3. He shall not cry nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed He shall not break, and a smoking flax shall He not quench. He shall bring forth judgment on the truth. He shall not cry or lift up. You know what that means? It means the Messiah did not come to complain and to argue. The Messiah did not come to cause a stir. He came to bring judgment. And we're all familiar with a trial that turns into a three-ring circus, where the process of bringing justice to an offender becomes more about the entertainment value and all the things that we'll be able to see on television than it does about bringing that person to justice. It is no surprise that in those situations where everyone is tuning in and everyone is entertained by this trial, that those trials often fail to bring true justice. Because the lawyers and the prosecutors and even the judge are more concerned about what their hair and their outfit is going to look like on the news that evening than bringing about the appropriate trial. When Jesus came, He did not make it about His voice being heard in the street. He did not make it about His complaints being heard. He made it about what He was called to do. See, oftentimes we say, I'm standing up for right. I'm standing up for what's right, and I'm going to let everybody hear my voice. Don't you feel sorry for me? I'm standing up for right, and everybody listen to what I have to say. That wasn't what Jesus came to do. He didn't come to lift up His voice in the streets. He came to bring true justice. He was faithful to His character. He was clear on what He was called to do. Jesus didn't come to make a scene. He came to bring justice and grace. And He was faithful to that purpose. Verse 2 is good, but verse 3 is great. A bruised reed He shall not break, and a smoking flax He shall not quench. A bruised reed is one that's been damaged, and you and I would see is no good. It's ruined. Get rid of it. Break it off and throw it away. Pluck it up and dispose of it. It is broken. It will not be recovered. There's no use to hold on to it. But you know what this passage says? It says, my servant will not even break a bruised reed. He will not throw out that reed that's been broken and bruised. He will not give up on that reed that everyone else would give up on. He doesn't throw it out. He doesn't break it off and throw it to the side. He gives it a chance to be restored. A smoking flax He will not quench. A smoking flax is a smoking candle. It's that candle just before it goes completely out. It's no longer a flickering flame, it's just smoking. Perhaps someone would take a candle snuffer and just snuff it out so there's no more smoke. The candle's not lit anymore, you might as well put it out. But Jesus does not snuff out the smoking candle. He doesn't quench the smoking flax. He doesn't throw water on the smoldering timber or stifle that burnt out candle. Rather, He gives it an opportunity to return to a flickering flame. And when Jesus came as the righteous judge, when He came to begin putting all things right, He was yet still so gentle that He wouldn't break a bruised reed or snuff out a smoking candle. Christ does not bring swift and final justice. Sometimes we wish that He would, but He did not bring swift and final justice because He was not going to break a bruised reed or snuff out a smoldering candle, because there was still the potential in those lives for redemption and restoration. In our court system, we cannot see a man's heart to see if there is any redeemable trait. We cannot see if a person deserves a second chance or not. We can merely go on the evidence and the facts as they are presented. But God can see that in that bruised reed, there is redemption. And in that smoldering wick of a candle, there is the potential to be lit on flame again. What God does is He looks at our soul, as broken as it is and as dark as it is, as bruised as it is and as smoky as it is, and He sees a reed that can be restored and straightened. He sees a candle that can be relit when He fans the flame. He sees the potential of restoration and redemption, and that is the reason that He is so gracious and patient in His judgment. He sees a potential for His work in us. Peter answered this question, why does God wait? Why doesn't God bring His judgment this Thursday? Why doesn't God bring His judgment today? I'm ready for it today. Peter said, the Lord is not slow concerning His promise, as some may count slowness, but is patient toward us. He is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. He's not quick to pronounce final judgment. He's patient, giving us all the opportunity we need to turn back to Him. You see, even in God's justice, He's merciful. And even in God's wrath, He's gracious. If you saw me this morning pull out a pipe from the pulpit and light it, you'd be surprised, but you wouldn't be terrified. But if what I pulled out instead of a pipe was a stick of dynamite, and I tried to light it, you'd tackle me, or you'd run. You'd be afraid. Why? Because there's a whole lot more explosive potential in a stick of dynamite. When Spurgeon was speaking on this passage, he said, the reason that Satan fears the smoldering wick and the reason that he tramples the bruised reed is because he knows the potential in a life that Christ gets a hold of. He is quick to trample the reed, and he snuffs out every candle because he knows the explosive potential in a life when Christ fans the flame. When Christ lights it, there is an incredible change in difference. God is merciful and just. But how does this work? How is this divine justice also fair while extending mercy? And the reason is in verse 1. Because my servant, my chosen one, who I uphold, who brings justice, he is the servant who will also pay the price. He is my servant who I have sent not only to bring justice, but to be the object of justice. If I hit your car and totaled it and refused to pay and you took me to court and the judge looked at me and he had pity on me, maybe he's my uncle, he's forgiving, and he says, Mr. Edwards, I'm going to be gracious and I'm going to forgive your recklessness. I would say, Judge, you're so gracious, you're so wonderful. But you would say, this is junk. Someone needs to pay for my car. This isn't fair. This is horrible. And the judge looked at you and he said, let me pay for your car because I recognize that my mercy carries a price. And you say, well, it's going to be really expensive. Don't you think that Daniel should have to pay? And the judge said, I know he can't pay, but I'll pay. That's what God has done. He is just and fair, but he pays the price for his own justice and mercy. When his son died on the cross, it took the punishment that we deserve so that he could remain just and be merciful. That's what God has done for us. God is the judge who says, I will pay for it myself. And I recognize that the price for my mercy is high. And I will pay dearly to remain both just and merciful. Friend, that's what God has done for us today. He has remained a God of justice while also being this God of mercy. And if you're here today and you don't know him, he offers you mercy and he has paid for his own justice, but he will not force you. He will give the blind sight, but he will not make them open their eyes. And he has offered you grace today, but he will not force you to accept it. If you continue to persist in your sin and you refuse his gracious gift, you will face his judgment because he is a God of mercy and justice. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.